Guests, we're open for public comment at this point. How you doing?
Good evening, Julie Kavanaugh, Board of Selectmen.
Could you speak up just a little bit, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
There you go. Julie Kavanaugh, Board of Selectmen, here tonight to speak in favor of CPC funds for Housing Trust. The board has endorsed it unanimously, and we've attended many meetings over the last 6 months, even to the year, including Cape Cod Commission and the Cape Housing Institute, and I'm sure you're aware that we are facing quite a housing crisis here on the Cape. Not things that we haven't seen in the past. If we don't address these issues, we can't move forward. I don't know what the Cape's going to look like. Ultimately, we need workforce housing, we need more affordable housing, and these funds have been sitting there for some time. We need this money for the trust in order to move forward. When we attended the Cape Housing Institute, it was very clear that without this kind of vehicle to make acquisitions and such, we're going to have difficulty in creating any type of housing. So I hope that you will seriously consider funding the Housing Trust. Thank you.
Good evening. Michael McCaskill, also representing the Board of Selectmen. First and foremost, Chairman, thank you, and thank the committee members for all the thought that you put into this process and the great work that you're doing for the town. Monday night, December 11th, the Board of Selectmen voted unanimously to support the Housing Trust and to come before CPC and ask you to put the cart before the horse. I know there's been some questions about whether or not this can happen before the trust is formed. You're going to make your decision. We're asking that you do. We're asking that we be able to hit the ground running after town meeting if this trust is passed. So the board unanimously wants this. As Julie just said, we believe that this is the vehicle to start working on some local initiative programs and to really start working on housing rather than waiting another year and coming back before CPC next year. It's been 5 years since we had any housing projects done. This year you have a lot of requests in front of you, but the board is very interested in this trust and being able to work on housing on a year-round basis. So we hope you'll consider it. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good evening, thank you. Linda Sabula of Harwich Port. Just a continuing question from last week on Open Space 12, the Judah Eldridge property. Didn't hear an answer as to how it was going to be funded, so I guess I need to be really specific accounting-wise, which is, where is the debit going? The town administrator said that it was going to be wiped out. Well, I think that the town and the voters deserve to know what wiped out means. Where is the debit going if we have to get really specific? And I hope that eventually someone can answer that question. Otherwise, I'd like to speak on Hinckley's Pond, Rec 15. According to the Act, CPA funds may be expended for the acquisition, creation, and preservation of open space. CPA funds can only be used to rehabilitate open space capital improvements, provided that the open space was originally created or acquired using CPA funds. Since the town did not acquire the pond in question with CPA funds may only be used to preserve the pond. The Act narrowly defines preservation to mean the protection of personal or real property from injury, harm, or destruction, but not including maintenance. Preservation is defined by the Alliance as preserving the pond in its current state. An alum treatment would not preserve the current state, but would be rehabilitation and therefore not allowed under the Act. There are several unanswered questions about alum treatment. How long does it last? CPA funds are not supposed to be spent on temporary fixes. What does alum do to the bottom of the pond? Is it going to sink to the bottom and cover the bottom? It doesn't seem healthy for the plants and the other aquatic animals. What steps are being taken to ensure that the continued nutrient flow from septic systems and other sources into the pond from the private properties will be significantly reduced or halted? I'd like to hear some of the science on that as opposed to the proponent's opinion. Other projects have been primarily about the removal of invasive species, which are more closely attached to the shoreline areas and clogging flow paths. Please keep in mind that there are 3 questions to be considered when voting to accept an application for CPC funding. First and foremost, is it
Linda, I'll
allowed?
Stop you right there.
Sure.
That's a decision that the board will make, and the board's completely affluent and,
Affluent?
well, they're completely knowledgeable about
Sure.
CPA funding and how it's supposed to be implemented. So, do you have anything else?
I am set. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
I said two things.
Mr. Administrator?
So we can kind of formally, that is the material that you were looking for, Mr. Chairman, the most up-to-date. I did have a copy down on my desk. So that's the current status. And then secondly, I'm not going to get into rebuttal, but in terms of on the housing trust, you folks had asked, I know you had reached out to the town of Yarmouth. I was kind of burning up the phone lines yesterday to see if I could get somebody out. There is nobody that's able to come out as a practitioner. I did have a conversation with Bob Lawton, my former counterpart. He's now retired from Yarmouth. I think he's been on the trust for about 11 years for the town of Yarmouth. He did agree to come out and meet in my office, so I want to do an open invitation, not for the majority, obviously, but if anyone wants to come out, and he's more than happy to spend an hour and answer any questions people have in regards to the trust. Next Thursday at 3 o'clock is what I arranged with him in my office. So if you do have specific questions about how the trust works and operates in another town, the one that we've modeled it on, Bob Lawton, the former administrator, will come out. My office, 3 o'clock on Thursday. If you would, if there is anyone interested in doing that, if you'd let me know, so I can make sure I make arrangements that if no one's going to show up, then I see Bob all the time. I don't need to chat with him, but if anyone would like to, I'll certainly let him confirm that we'll be on for Thursday. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anybody else under public comment? Sir?
Hi, good evening. Jim Chevry from East Harwich. I just want to address one comment that Chris Clark made last week when he was talking about Judah Eldridge. One thing that he said actually a couple of times was that he was approached by neighbors. Like he kept saying like neighbors were interested in getting that for conservation. But when I did the No on 9 2 years ago, I actually went door to door and like knocked on doors all over Harwich. So it wasn't just the neighbors that were really interested in that. And I just wanted to kind of let everybody know that it was across the whole town. Everybody knew about Hawk's Nest. Everybody wanted to see it preserved. So I just want to pass that along.
All right, thank you. Is there anybody else under? All right, moving on. Approval of the minutes, December 7th.
I'll make a motion that the minutes be accepted.
All those second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
It's a vote. Okay, presentations tonight. The first presentation will be the Saquatucket Harbor landside production. Well, landside pedestrian access. Sure, that's fine, yep.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, John Rendon, Harbor Master. Thanks for having me. I think you have in your packet what I just put up. I just did a larger scale, but essentially, that's the site plan of the Saquatucket Landside Project. And what's highlighted in yellow is the series of lighted boardwalks, ramps, walkways that are part of this project. And that is essentially what I'm looking to have funded through the CPC. Why are we doing this? One of the primary objectives of our landside project is to improve pedestrian safety, pedestrian access, as well as handicap accessibility, having equal safe access for all people. Current state, as you've probably heard me say a number of times, current state at Saquatucket Harbor, we have hundreds and hundreds of people that go to Saquatucket on a daily basis to board the ferry, to board passenger boats, to board charter boats, to go to their recreational boats. And currently, we have an unsafe situation. People purchase their ferry tickets, and one of the passenger boats across the street at 28, they purchase their tickets, they walk across that busy street to access the harbor. The other passenger boats have their ticket offices with people lining up in the thruway where boats, truck and trailers access the ramp. And it's unsafe, and that's one of the objectives of our plan, is to improve that situation. And so, and we also have a road that goes along the front of the harbor where truck and trailers go, and that road is where these groups line up and walk down that road to access the docks. And it's just an accident waiting to happen. I'm very fortunate that in the 5+ years I've been there, we haven't had an accident. But that's one of the things we're trying to do. We're trying to bring the passenger boat ticketing operation to harbor side of 28, and we're expanding the Downey property. You know, we purchased the Downey property several years ago, and we're incorporating the Downey into the harbor plan. A lot of it is parking, but part of that is to bring some of those ticket booths over so that the natural progression for pedestrians to go is down that meandering walkway and down the path to the boardwalks that go past our harbor master office. And then you have a boardwalk that goes the entire length of the waterfront, and that boardwalk steers people, and people handicapped who may be in wheelchairs, to the handicap accessible ramp system that is part of our marina project. And that marina project is funded and already in the works. And so our marina will be totally handicap accessible. And this landside piece of that supports our marina operation. And it's, you know, we've worked real hard within the department over the past 5 years to make all of our facilities handicap accessible. Allen Harbor is handicap accessible. Small public marina area. I mean, there's not a whole lot, but that access is handicap accessible. And we received a grant from the state to help us to get that project done. You look at Witchmere, our commercial fish pier. Brand new fish pier, we got a Seaport grant, and we made sure that that is handicap accessible to the public float that goes down at the end of the south side of, west side of that pier is handicap accessible. And as I've stated, our marina will be handicap accessible. And this landside piece of it is a real important piece that I think certainly supports the local comprehensive plan, you know, calls for that. And I think this project well supports that. So, you know, it's one piece of a bigger landside project that I know you're familiar with. You've heard us. We have it's a $3 million appropriation project. The budget is tight. You've read and heard some of the briefs, and you understand, I think, where we're at. And this would go a long way to helping us to get this important project done, and especially this piece to provide safety for pedestrians and equal access for all. If there's any questions.
Cindy,
No questions.
Mary.
I guess my question is, if you don't get the funding, how will these walkways be constructed, or and what's the kind of alternate plan if you don't get the money?
Sure. Right now, we have done some value engineering. We've done some slight reductions to the current plan that's in place, and that is this area, if I may, this area here was a boardwalk type structure, a raised boardwalk that led us here. This now we've reduced in scope to be a kind of paved not paved, stone dust type meandering walkway. Again, handicap accessible, but it's not the paved, it's not the boardwalk structure. And same as with this area here where the artisan shacks are, that was a boardwalk. And in order to try to get within budget, we've reduced that to a walkway that is stone dust type material. But beyond that, everything else that we show here is the boardwalk that came with the initial plan that we think is doable within the budget we have.
In terms of the overall project, the only part that's being left out at this stage also is the Downey property, the actual paving of it. We have not identified funding yet to do that work.
Okay. Nothing else
Awesome.
for me. I'm all set.
Dan?
Thank you. Can you give us some sense of, you're requesting $250,000. Can you give us some sense of what the composition of that number is by budget item?
I went by the budget that was provided to me, and I believe I attached the line item in the budget in my packet from the architects. So, I mean, it was a line item within the construction contract that said elevated decks, ramps, stairs, boardwalks,
Okay.
including concrete retaining wall at the east end. And breaking it down any further than that, I don't have that information right now for you.
Yeah, could you get us that information?
Sure.
Okay.
You mean like the boardwalk along the waterfront is this number, and the walkway between the artisan shacks is this number? That's the kind of detail you want?
I think in terms of if there's any personal service involved, or is it strictly materials and equipment?
Okay, this number includes equipment and labor to,
Okay.
for all of the walkways
It's
included.
a lump sum number for the work to do the boardwalk. So everything shown in yellow is included in that 277 number.
Right.
And this number was developed by whom?
This is by the estimator, by the architect that did, our hired professional architect.
Maybe he could just give us a little breakdown of what's
Sure,
in there?
I certainly can.
Okay.
I can get that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All
That's it.
set, Dan?
Yep.
Kathy?
Yeah, just a clarification. So what's highlighted in yellow there and here, is some of it's going to be partially the stone dust walkway, and some of it is what you're asking funding for?
The
Or-
whole
or-
thing is what we're asking funding for.
Okay, so if the request for 250,000 was granted, then there would be no stone dust walkway?
Correct.
Okay. I have to say, it was a great proposal.
Thank you.
A lot of work went into it.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. I know I listened at one of the Board of Selectmen meetings that you currently have some other grant requests in. Are any of them specifically geared towards the walkway or, that kind of thing? And if that came to fruition,
Yes, ma'am. I hope I have the problem of having
Yeah,
two
I know.
that are for that. So we have Seaport Economic Council grant request for $1 million towards this project. That really was not specific towards the boardwalks. It was more the entire project that we were looking funding support for. But we also do have a Massachusetts Office of Disabilities ADA grant request as well that would address this specific area. So that's currently what we have pending in requests. I don't have answers on any of them yet.
okay. I'm good.
Jim?
Okay, yeah, John. Am I right in assuming that this is like one component of the total landside plan for the Saquatucket Harbor area?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, could you tell me what the status of the total plan is?
Sure, the contract has been awarded, it's been approved, it's been awarded to Eastward Companies, who was the low bid throughout the bid process. We've issued the notice to proceed, and we're moved out of the harbor master's office. They're getting ready to demo the building. We are moving forward with the project currently.
Okay, and now that's for the harbor master's office.
That is-
Are there other components of the landside plan
Oh, I'm sorry.
besides this in the harbor master's office?
That's correct. I mean, The elements of the project is the harbor master office, which includes public restrooms and separate restrooms for our slip permit holders. Again, fully accessible, handicap accessible. The harbor master office, the boardwalks, the garage workshop area that is going to be a building on the Downey property, and then the artisan shack area. So those are the elements of the project, the landside project.
And what is the status of the other elements?
It's all, that contract included all of those elements, and so that is the project that we're moving forward with.
Oh, so with the contract that's already out plus this, that's the totality of what's going to happen at Sequatucket Harbor,
Landside, yes, sir.
landside?
The water side is a whole separate project. The marina side is a whole separate project that is also underway.
Okay. What I don't see that I've heard is that there's been various discussions with regard to a snack shack
Yep.
or restaurant or something. Is that part of what's under construction now?
No, sir, that was part of our, that was part of the initial contract that was included as an ad alternate in our contract that went out. We were hoping to include that in the landside project, but the budget just didn't allow it. And we had included it as an ad alternate because we were concerned, you know, that we wouldn't have sufficient funding. So that is not part of this project.
Okay, thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next. How you doing?
Good. Here we meet again.
Could you identify
Chairman-
yourself, please, for
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
audience?
Committee members, I am Heinz Proft, Natural Resources Director for the town of Harwich. And I originally proposed this Hinckley's restoration project to the board, it was 4 years ago, and then it was a year we didn't do it, and then 2 years ago, and this is another opportunity to meet with you. It says there's 5 minutes for a presentation. Some of this you've heard. I can certainly go through it in great detail again, or respond more to the changes that are in this plan, which incorporate some public access. And I heard some of the questions earlier that were brought up in the public, discussion about Hinckley's Pond, the restoration of it, alum treatment, things like that. This goes to addressing the situation that Hinckley's is always under. It's just we don't see, smell, taste phosphorus until the point that we have an algae bloom. So the conditions in the pond, in about 15 feet or deeper, have phosphorus in that sediment. It's bound to iron, and it can come up into the water's constituted circumstances to create an algal bloom under the conditions with the right water temperatures, sunlight. It can't be predicted. We didn't have one this year. It doesn't mean we won't have one next year. The conditions are there and will continue to exist in Hinckley's Pond. It's the largest freshwater pond that is in its entirety within Harwich borders. It serves as a conduit for the water that comes up Herring River into Long Pond and Seymour Pond for herring run. It's fished, it's boat, people swim in it. So it's just something that the town, through the Natural Resources Department, has tried to address in the past. And one final comment, that type of treatment that's being requested in this project was done in Long Pond, shared with Brewster, was successful. No alum treatment is a one-time and then you're good forever. In this case, it has a 20-year time horizon. There are things the town can do to extend that or get a better bang for its buck. It has to deal with runoff, septic around that pond's borders, working with in this case, bog owners on either side to best management practices, and any kind of influence of runoff or phosphorus from the other ponds. But it's the project that you've seen before, and it's just come before you again.
I'd just like to add a couple things, since I think
Yeah.
we've done this act together now. It's our third time. When we came out initially, it was just to do the alum treatment. I think it is important that it is part of our comprehensive wastewater management plan, and as Heinz said, it's part of a chain of ponds that we have an issue with that leads to the Herring River. And the Herring River is an impaired embodiment that we need to make sure we address. So doing something in the chain we need to make sure we get the appropriate links so we help ourselves down the line. And, you know, when I was here before, I really do believe in being cooperative and listening. And when I was here 2 years ago and we asked, what I heard was, okay, we have a pond and we're cleaning it up, but how does the public get access to it? So we have intentionally this year put in a request to have stairs that will go down, a pavilion or a covering for people on the bike trail, and that we will allow people, as they're going with their bikes, to be able to park. The restaurant, which I cannot, I always forget the name,
across the road.
street.
Yeah.
But they have signs up where they do not want bikes, they do not want bicyclists commingling with cars. So it would be natural to have the spot on our side that they blocked off because the access for the cars, the visibility is just too sharp of a turn. So we did include in this plan, I think it was an additional $75,000 to do the walkway down, to do a viewing platform for folks that may be in a wheelchair that cannot go down and access the pond. So we do have that as part of this. And that is, you know, trying to be responsive. I mean, I get it that we don't want to just clean up the pond. We want to make sure we clean it up and have a better access. So we included those components in this proposal. I think this is one that has been around a long time. Quite honestly, I'm a little embarrassed that we've had a fish kill this year. So to say that the problem doesn't exist, the problem's here. The problem's been here. The only question is, when are we going to actually do something to clean it up? So last year, I did present to the Board of Selectmen that I think we should just do this as part of the overall sewer funding plan, and we need to get it done. It's that serious. The board asked me, in good faith, to come back and try again. Other towns have approved this type of work with CPC funds. So I don't think that there's really any debate or discussion about that it's not a permissible use. It is certainly a permissible use. So I would ask for consideration. I would ask that, you know, you folks asked us in the past to do things that we've been responsive to, and we have it as part of our overall plan now. But, you know, we cannot continue to wait, because I will tell you, and you know, this guy kind of woke me up when he came in one day. When those signs that go up, when a fish kill occurs, is don't let your dogs in the water, don't let animals in the water, because it can harm them. And we kid ourselves to not think that if little kids go down to that beach and want to go swimming, that they won't be hurt. It happened this summer. The time is now. Actually, the time was yesterday to do this. So I think it's important that that be done. I really do. And I think it's appropriate that it's before CPC. And as I had indicated before, and I would indicate again, since, you know, we're televised now, we're not asking CPC to fund $200 million worth of the wastewater program. The applicable part of what we can do and what we can use CPC funds as part of the comprehensive wastewater management plan is Hinckley's Pond and Seymour's Pond. And that would be the requests that are applicable and related to CPC. Hinckley is the bigger of the two. I think we have, Seymour's is 5 years out.
Yeah.
I think it's about 5 years out, and it's about 300,000, so half the size. And Seymour's feeds into Hinckley's, which they all feed into the Herring River. So I think one way or another, I would ask that we get the funding from CPC, because I think it is appropriate. Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm going to start with the questioning, if the board doesn't mind. Chris, the board has 2 copies of 2 different legal opinions from Copeland and Page. Has there been a third update at all about the opinion? So the opinion's 2 years old?
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny, we want to manage the legal budget. If other towns have expended the money for alum treatments, which, you know, my last town, we operated a wastewater treatment plant. We used alum all the time, and we immediately put it into a river. It's a known commodity. Why, you know, I mean, I can get a third legal opinion that will say, if the town chooses to use it, it's an appropriate use of those funds. I mean, how many times do I ask the same question, Mr. Chairman? That's only my frustration.
Okay, we'll start with Jim.
Okay, I guess my main question has to do with the budget, and I guess I'm a little bit confused, and maybe I'm missing something here. But what I see is a $550,000 sort of estimate for Hinckley's Pond, a $6,800 and something dollar estimate for the bike shelter, and a $14,000 estimate for the stairway, coming to a grand total of like 570,000 something.
Right.
Now, you're asking for 650.
Right.
I don't see where the difference is, and also I don't see the breakdown of the elements, of the budget
Sure.
in each of those elements.
I can address the big portion. The $550,000 was the estimate from the original town survey that was done in 2012. It's in the neighborhood of 550,000. So as this project has come down, we're 7 years into it. In the capital outlay form, it asks for a time inflation rate. So 10% of 550 is 55,000. So that's around 600,000. At the time this was submitted, September 29th, because the due date was there, we were still working with the conservation agent, Amy Uzowski, on the public access side, and how much of that would be done in terms of access, what could or could not be done at the town, assistance, materials, and so forth. So there was a little bit of a gap with what could or could not be done in-house. We weren't at that point, but we put together the schematic, and then that's where there was the extra public access funds. So that's a little closer to answering that, unless there's
But
another
I
number.
think, just to be clear, the alum treatment would be 600,000. It was 500, it was 550. We've inflated it because the number that we've used, the original estimate is now 2012.
7
so
years old.
It's several years old. We did put in a higher number for the shelter and for the stairway down. I have had subsequent conversations after we submitted the materials with Mr. Libby, our facility maintenance director, and asked him what would it cost to put the maintenance, to put the shelter up and to do the stairway down. And now it's 75,000. I think we had submitted a larger number. So we have a better idea on those numbers. In terms of the numbers for the shelter and basically the recreational components, Mr. Libby over the last 3 years has been building stairways down to water throughout the community. I think he's done 7 of them. He's done 5, I think, so far. He has 2 more to do. And he just built that shelter. The shelter that we have over at Brooks Park would be duplicated. So the combination, he knows those numbers, and it's not all the total cost. We're going to get the materials, and then DPW will supply the labor. So we are able to be a little bit more cost efficient by having DPW do the work.
Okay. Is it possible to submit to us the updated budgets in as much detail as you can possibly do?
You have, well, other than what I've just described, I could do those numbers, but.
Because the budget I have comes to 570,000 according to what was submitted in your application. And what you're saying is that that's not the updated budget.
We'll submit an updated
Yeah,
we'll
if you
submit
could
updated information.
and please submit it in as much detail as possible so we can understand the components of each element, especially the larger element, which is, the alum treatment of the pond.
Yeah, and
Now,
the copy that I have is the original says 650, so I'm curious where that
650 as to what you're asking
Yeah.
for, but when you go into the application, I only see 3 figures.
Okay.
One is 550,000 estimate for the
Yeah.
pond. The other is $6,877
Oh,
for the bike shelter, and the other is $14,000 for the stairway.
right, okay.
Those are the only backup figures I have in the application to support the request for 650, and it does not come up to
Right,
650.
that inflation
So
number.
I understand that there are updated numbers, but we need all those numbers, and we need it in as much breakdown as you can possibly do in order to truly evaluate this project. So that was my major question. The second question that I have is, by doing the recreational improvements, you are still pretty much just limiting the recreational access to people that go there by bicycle. Am I correct?
It's true, or walkers.
Or walkers who are walking along the bike
Right.
trail or along Route 120?
There's no convenient, publicly owned parking.
Well,
in those
that's
parks.
what I was asking for, Chris, so that, basically, has there been any consideration of looking for a site where there can be at least some public parking within it doesn't have to be right at that specific spot, but within a reasonable distance that people can walk in to make this a more usable recreational area, and therefore be more justification for the funds that are coming out of the Community Preservation Act. Has there been any consideration of that, or could there be?
Well, we did walk the site. I think that there's a lot of privately owned property. We have not engaged in any private property owner discussions about potentially doing what we did with the TD Bank lot, if you would. where
Right,
we did
yeah,
a
correct.
dollar lease. We could certainly pursue that. The closest public parking for cars is at Headwaters. There's where the bike trail is.
Yeah, correct.
So you could park there, and then it would be a little bit, I don't remember, we walked it, it wasn't, altogether that far, but it's not 100 feet.
Within
I mean,
sight,
it's a little bit of a distance. But, we are doing it along a bike trail, and cars don't go on bike trails, so, you know what I mean?
That's why
We're
I'm
trying
asking the
to-
question, Chris.
We're trying to get a sense, and we will maybe do some directional signage at the Headwaters parking area to guide people up and let them know that it's there.
Okay. Because, again, I'm concerned about the justification of this total project under the Community Preservation Act, which specifically, and, I've read the legal opinions also, but the act specifically refers to land. Okay, that's all, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kathy?
Well, since this is the third time that this has come before us, we have a lot of literature that we've read. We've got different opinions that we've gotten. A couple things. One, we got an opinion once from our coalition that said that, in general, we advise communities not to give any weight to projects done in other towns as part of determining if a project should receive funding in your town. The CPA project data is self-reported by towns and does not allow you to know all the details that you would need to understand another town's project.
Sure.
Towns have different levels of understanding of what's allowable and not allowable. So in some of the literature, it talks about how the pond is subject to agricultural and residential inputs. I'm assuming that's septic, fertilizer, the bogs, et cetera, et cetera. And so what is the sort of water management program that's in place now? Not later,
No,
but now.
the roads that lead into Hinckley's Pond, some of them are steeper than others. So there's a diversion of some of that runoff. They're private roads, so you can only ask the homeowners to do a certain amount. The septic regulations as to the distance from the pond, 100, 300, 500. Originally, I had to go through with the town's reports and count up the number of homes that were this, and there was a change as to new homes being built could not build that close. So any kind of turnover or so forth has changed distance of septic to the shoreline. I've met with the bog owners on either side, the cranberry bog owners, but they already were doing most everything they could for runoff. Now, there's a carbon filter that they use on one side when they apply their fertilizers and things, so that doesn't run into the pond. But it needs to be managed and checked, and I would go up there and make sure that was in place. So that was more a follow-up of what was taking place. And the ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and things that they use in their fertilizers is the minimum that they need. They don't put more than they need to. It's a cost prohibitive thing for them to do, and they then will apply it at a time when it wouldn't run off. Now, north of the road, Route 124, it hasn't currently been done, but there may be a reshaping of that road or change of any runoff from there as well. But that wouldn't be something that is currently being done, but it's all part of this addressing the pond and its situation. But that major phosphorus in the bottom is there. Public access and increasing, that's all good stuff. But that won't directly affect the water quality of Hinckley's Pond.
But is there anything in place right now that, regulates how much fertilizer a homeowner uses, or the kinds?
There's no town bylaw, but
Yeah, I want to respond to a couple of different ways, more comprehensive. Specifically to the fertilizer, the state does have some guidelines, and we certainly will look whether Conservation does them or Board of Health does them. Fertilizer, I think, is about 8 to 10% of the overall issue in the community when it comes to nitrogen loading into the environment. the vast majority of it is septic systems. I think one thing that's important is that the way, I try to do things in a simple way so I can remember them more accurately. And what the issue is that we have test stations down in the Herring River, and we monitor that water. And if the state regulation is that we have to get down to total parts per million of 5, and we're currently at 10, then we need to diminish that by 5. Under our comprehensive wastewater management plan, there has been a very specific intention to sewer and do primarily sewering south of Route 6. Obviously, this site is north of Route 6. So the idea is to get the 5 or 6 parts per million that we need out of the southern section with the sewering that will go along the Herring River. So we don't have a specific plan for this, but it is part of the overall plan for reducing the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus loading into the system. So there's not a specific element for, and to be perfectly honest, I don't know if the technology truly exists for individual homeowners to put a system in that's going to get to the level of nitrogen removal that we would need to achieve, that we can achieve with a treatment plant. So there's no specific infrastructure that's there, but there's more infrastructure that's downstream. The fertilizer, we have to see. I believe that the state regulations may be sufficient enough to get the accomplishment that we want to accomplish. If not, then we will try to mirror a state regulation with either a Board of Health or a conservation regulation at the town level.
Okay, but this is all going to be after the fact. In other words,
It's a 8-phase, 40-year plan, so it's all part of the plan, including doing this work.
yeah, I mean, you would think that we could put some practices into place ahead of time to start to mitigate some of this.
Well, we will, and we have been. I mean, the other piece, just to show, on 124, we did make an effort, when I first started, it was an effort already well underway, to redo Route 124 and to update it. Part of that updating is not just the road, it's not just the blacktop on the street, it's putting in environmentally sensitive catch basins. So that is in the street plan that Mr. Hooper has, and I think it's 5 years out, that he is going to go in and repave, not widen, not change, but just repave, and he will do some of that drainage and get some of the improvement. The other piece of it, I think it's 80% from septic systems, 10% from fertilizer, and then about another 10% from road runoff. So we are addressing and have a plan to address the road runoff as part of our overall road management plan.
Okay, and the fish kill this year, you know what kind of fish it was?
Yeah, well, I talked to Division of Fisheries on that, the photo was there. There were a couple species, but primarily it was like a sucker carp, you can see the tendrils on it. You wouldn't say, fish still didn't cause that, but that's an indication of low dissolved oxygen, which is what you had in the summer. And the photo, there were reports of over 100 fish. By the time I got there, I counted maybe 50 or 60 along the shoreline. We've had fish kills before in Hinckley's, not recently, but this was the most recent one. So, and it was short in duration. It was a one-time event there, but it's just another kind of like clue in the list that the pond isn't as healthy as it can be.
And I think it's important that fish are at the higher end of the spectrum, so a lot of other things are being negatively impacted, and all those have been so impacted that the fish are at the high end of the food chain.
Yeah, and fish are mobile. They can, if they're in an area that isn't well oxygenated, they can move, but the benthic animals, the animals in there, there's some freshwater mussels and other invertebrates that they can't move. They're stuck in their spot, and they wouldn't wash up. They're just going to die in the pond.
So in terms of improving the public access, which I think we should be doing anyway, I mean, this ADA compatible walkway, you have to come from the Headwaters Trail in your wheelchair or whatever to use this. But people still are gonna have to portage kayaks, canoes, and other things for fishing quite a long way to actually, use the pond. Why do we need a bike kiosk? I mean,
It's a bike trail.
no, I know it's a
I
bike
think
trail,
that
but why do
was
we
kind of the
need this
rationale, was
structure?
just-
Why do we need the structure, I guess? I mean, we, some things to lock up your bikes, that's fine, but I don't know why we need the
I think the
structure.
inspiration for that was, if we're gonna have people park a bike and it rains, we wanna give them a place to get out of the rain. The other thing is, they have it up in Orleans, so quite honestly, I saw it up in Orleans, and they seem to be pretty heavily used.
Well, the structure that was in the application, like, holds 6 bikes, I think.
I don't remember.
I don't know how many were in there.
Okay.
I don't know what they put there.
So the question is then, would the public access improvements be done regardless of the pond remediation funding? I mean,
Trying to separate them?
well, I mean, we've been, you know, it's been unfortunate that it's listed as a public pond and there's been no public access. So the question is,
I think if CPC were to fund, you know, the 75,000 for the recreational access, we would obviously do that work. If you choose not to fund the, you know, the treatment that needs to be done, at least it would be my recommendation that, you know, it needs to be done, and it would go to the taxpayers. My recommendation to the board would be that it goes to the taxpayers and put it on for the wastewater management plan.
okay,
Part of the comprehensive wastewater management
Anyway,
plan.
yeah.
all right. So this is my last question. In all this reading and stuff, we had a letter from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue with some other town's thing, but it talks about the difference between preservation and some other things, and as Linda had stated, preservation is narrowly defined to mean protection of personal or real property from injury, harm, or destruction, but not including maintenance. If the scope of the work involved does not meet the definition, it would be considered rehabilitation or restoration, and in this case could not be undertaken because the pond was not originally acquired or created with community preservation monies. Rehabilitation projects are those involving substantial and extraordinary improvements to the property or asset in order to make it functional for its intended use. So when I read that, that says to me that this is rehabilitation, and therefore it wouldn't be funded, but that's just my opinion.
All set?
Yep.
Dan?
And this is addressed to either one of you, whoever wants to take it on. To what degree of confidence do you have that if this treatment were made, that it would resolve the problem?
Historically, it's shown that it works. The $30,000 study that the town put forward with the scientists to come and take samples, and we took additional samples after that to get a finer sense of what the pond had in its sediment. Other towns have also used it and been successful. I was in front of a board at one point and said, well, you know, if we apply this, will it be successful? Well, without 100% certainty, you can't say yes, but highly likely, especially because the neighboring body of water, Long Pond, has been successful. We haven't had the fish kills. Oxygen level is fine. Water sampling there is fine. We're 7 or 8 years now into the Long Pond one. That one also was given a kind of 20-year time horizon. Successful, how do you determine that? Well, hopefully we won't have algal blooms. Hopefully we have healthy fish populations. Hopefully we have invertebrate and diversity of life that fish going through. So from my definition, or how I perceive as being successful, it would be. But it isn't the one thing and be done kind of forever kind of thing. But highly likely.
Are there any risks in terms of it not working?
The risks are if the alum is not applied in the correct manner. Now, how I define it, you have to have somebody who's permitted and licensed to do it. You can't, it's not just bag somebody willy-nilly throw it. You have to hire someone who does it, who's licensed to do that, and applies it under certain wind conditions and temperature, and evenly applies it based upon the concentration that you have at the bottom of your pond. You can't just look at one pond and say, well, it's this size and it's going to cost this much, and this it's a sediment grab consistency concentration of that. The kind of either disadvantages or chances of it being, that falls on it being licensed, appropriately treated at the time of year with its conditions similar to Long Pond. So done correctly, you'd be confident that it would work.
Thank you. I'm through.
Mary?
Just a couple of clarifications for me, if you could.
Sure.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the alum binds with the phosphorus to trap it, sends it to the bottom into the sediment, so that you don't have the large algae bloom, which I refer to as the green scum that covers the whole pond. Mr. Administrator commented earlier about wastewater treatment plants. It's not always easy to get to the phosphorus levels you need, the reduction you need in your regular NPEDS permits, because have seen situations where even in a wastewater treatment situation, you have excess phosphorus and you have these continual algal blooms. So if this doesn't get funded this way, is it a request for a debt exclusion through the town in order to fund something? I've seen towns get sued for not reducing the phosphorus and not preventing algal blooms in
We run a risk of non-compliance with our CWMP. This is part of the CWMP plan, and it was supposed to be done as part of phase 1. It's already 5 years overdue.
I'm sorry, it's 5 years overdue already?
It's overdue already.
Okay,
And the conservation law.
all right. Nothing further from me.
And just to my point about a treatment plant can remove up to 95%. A homeowner's package plant can only remove 50%.
Understood,
So it was just more efficient method to do it through.
understood.
I wasn't saying it was perfect by any stretch.
No, and have seen issues where towns have had a hard time even getting to
Oh,
their required levels with licensed wastewater treatment plants, so
I administered
It's a
one in my
problem.
last community.
it's a problem. Thanks,
All set, Mary?
I am.
Thank you.
Cindy?
I think my questions have been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
All set, thank you very much for coming. Okay, next up, we were gonna get a presentation from the Yarmouth Housing Trust tonight. I got an email from Mary Wagner, and she was unable to attend tonight's meeting. So, we're gonna move on. Under old business, a discussion of real estate and open space, the Judith Eldridge property.
Yes, the question was asked last week.
Why don't you step over there from on that side,
Okay.
please?
Put together a little timeline for the committee, just so they had an
Thank you.
understanding of
Thank you.
our dealings with this particular project. Thank you. Okay, I believe the question last week was
Would you
asked.
please?
Yes, Kathy Green, Chair of Real Estate and Open
Thank you.
Space Committee. The question was just asked as to why Real Estate and Open Space had not supported the application. And basically, a couple of things. One, there were a number of funding issues at the time of the vote, and those questions were not answered sufficiently. We did not feel it was in danger of being developed due to the complexity of the title, and the committee, realizing that CPA has limited funds now and moving forward, felt that this wasn't the highest priority use of those funds. That's it.
Are any other questions from the board members?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anything under other than? Next meeting agenda points.
Under other,
Go ahead, Ken.
nameplates.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes,
I'm starting to press.
is there anybody else that has anything on the other? Okay. Next meeting agenda points. We're going to go into discussion next meeting about the packages themselves. And how we feel about them. I may ask at some point for a consensus of the board, how we feel about each one of the individual items. But I would like the board to be aware that there's, from the town's point of view, there is an application from the department heads, and there's an application, and there's documentation from the administration on how they view those numbers. So please, take a look at it. You're gonna have to make a summary judgment of which side of the equation you're gonna come down on. And that's it. Dan?
When you say you want to get a consensus from the board, do you have any, how do you propose to do that? Are we
I'm
gonna-
formulating that in my head as we speak.
Okay, because I would strongly suggest that we continue with our practice of taking straw votes.
Go ahead.
The concern that I think I have with the straw vote process is that tends to lock individuals in to their straw vote. I think the process that David may be talking about is a more open discussion as to, on each item as to how we feel about it and whether we're in favor of it and why. Now, through some of that discussion, some of us, based on, our opinions, may have some influence on other members of the committee who may change their initial, opinion. And I think David is trying to allow that discussion to occur, but at the same time get some sense as to whether or not we're going to end up with a vote that's going to be within the funds available. Because as we all know, we have more applications, there are requests for more funding than we have available. And one of the things that we have to take a look at is that, if we're all in favor of every application, then something's got to go. So I think through David's process, which is not locking us into a straw vote, will promote more sort of open discussion where some members may have some points that they like to bring up that may influence other members.
Can I comment?
Go ahead.
I never viewed my straw vote as locking me into an actual vote. And in fact, with this consensus discussion, you're in effect having a de facto straw vote. So, but.
Did it?
Jim?
You see, from my point of view, if you are voting one way on the straw vote, unless some new information comes to you after the straw vote that you can document as to why you're changing, in my opinion, you are kind of being locked into voting in that way in the final vote. But I think every member views it differently.
Mary?
I tend to agree with Jim on one other point, too. To me, a vote is a vote. Whether it's a straw vote or a real vote, it's a vote. So I would prefer not to have us vote until we're taking final votes. I mean, personally speaking, I think a straw vote really is a vote. So I tend to err on the side of caution on that point. My own 2 cents, but it's up to the chair. So,
Kathy?
Well, Dan, what do you see as the benefit of the straw vote?
I think it gives like a preliminary indication of where people are leaning. Now, if this consensus discussion ends up people saying, I do support that or I don't support that, that in essence is providing some kind of measure and some means of how people are going to vote. So.
Well, I guess maybe the thing is that it's a consensus discussion versus a, vote.
In my view, it's still a de facto straw vote, but, you can take the lead.
Cindy?
Well, and again, I would appreciate discussion. I'm kind of leaning towards Dan, that it kind of gives you a sense of where things are, and I never felt locked in with the straw vote. It was discussion and then that final vote. But Mary's probably, a vote is a vote.
Jim?
Jim,
If I could make
Go
one
ahead.
additional comment. I mean, I think through the process that David is proposing, it may allow us a little bit more freedom to get into issues that was brought up on one of the items tonight, which with regard to, maybe some of us want to fund one part of an application, but not the total part of the application. And do we want to split the application? And also have some more free, discussion with regard to maybe we're in favor of the application, but we feel that the funding level is a little bit too high, and we were in favor of the application, but maybe at a slightly reduced funding level. So I think David's process would allow us to get more freely into those discussions than just going for a straw vote on yes or no on each application.
I think, if I may,
Go ahead,
we've
Cindy.
always had discussion, kind of at the point of final application, and now it's time for review. We've always had discussion. So that's just what I would like to maintain.
Dan,
Instead of calling it a straw vote, we could have a polling of the members. We're eventually whether we have discussion and people talk about which way they're leaning on a particular project, or you poll members in terms of which way they are leaning, I don't see the,
my reason for doing this is I recently watched one of the board meetings with zoning board. And they had a significant project that they were dealing with. And they wanted to get a consensus of how the board felt about particular issues. There's a couple of issues here that was a couple of these applications I really want to drill down on. And I thought this might be a vehicle that would be better, rather than to just have a discussion of the individual unit and then say, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to vote on that? Let's have a vote on it. And that's essentially what we've done for the past few years, at least since I've been on this board. So I'm trying to broaden that discussion. But ultimately, it's up to you folks what you want to do. You can come, and that'll happen in the next meeting. I can make a recommendation to you, but I'm not going to direct you to do a certain thing. It's up to you. There's going to be a lot of discussion with some of these articles, and I want to have those discussions. So I'm going to leave this argument at that until next meeting. This is a board discussion.
I just wanted to know.
That this is a board discussion. So, does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And I'll second.
All those in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.